It's an honor and privilege to be here this bright June morning, speaking with my erstwhile colleague, Professor Evangeline Manickam, who retired after 36 years of service, research, and teaching at IIT Madras. My name is Mathangi Krishnamurthy. I'm Associate Professor of Anthropology at IIT Madras. And Evangeline, what an honor. Really lovely to have this conversation with you. And I just want to give listeners a brief introduction to your work. And please feel free to correct me at any point if I get things wrong. Evangeline, and it's my delight to be able to call Evangeline by her first name. It's something that she has accorded me in friendship and generosity from the first day I met her. Retired, but I met her when I first joined the department in 2013. And from day one, 2 doors down from my office, it's been so fun to know her. I know that Evangeline's work and research have been in American literature. She has published the student edition of The Great Gatsby. She also specializes in humor studies and has more than 8 papers in that field. And of late, for the last many years, she has been working on questions of diaspora, Indian Americans in America and the United States, but also all around the world. So let me begin first, Evangeline, by welcoming you, by thanking you for being willing to have this conversation with me. And I want to get you started from the beginning to tell us, how did it all begin?
Thank you so much, Mathangi. This has been a wonderful opportunity to be back in touch with the department and to meet you again and be to reminiscence about the old times and beginnings, because years have gone by and so much has changed. But some things stay on forever, and we are the beneficiaries of a wonderful institute. I loved being here all these years, and in fact, it's a huge adjustment when one has to leave. IIT spoils you for the rest of the world, and especially for the rest of the concrete jungle outside in Chennai. So happy to be here, and lovely to be doing this interview.
Great. So when I said, how did it all begin? I actually want to know everything. I want to know, before you embarked upon this career and became a student, a scholar, a teacher, and a professor of literature, how did your interest in this field begin?
Well, I think the interest in literature began from the day I learned to read, which was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And funnily enough, the American literature influenced me even at that age, because there was an American library attached to the consulate on Mount Road, which my mother used to take us every Saturday. That was closed to students after there was some objection about spelling. A student's spelling was going off because of
American English.
LOR and stuff like that. So they they closed down the children's section, and I didn't get back to that opportunity for reading, but I was by that time an avid reader and had already quite a bit of America imbibed in my psyche. I did literature because I loved to read, and I wanted to do something that I would not get ever tired of. So nobody knew whether I was studying or I was just reading. That was the joy of doing undergraduate and graduate and going on to a PhD. I was good at math, but I'm sure I would never have done a PhD in math or physics or chemistry or any of those subjects that I was equally good at. So my undergraduate and postgraduate at Madras Christian College, again a wonderful place to be, brilliant teachers. And one thing there was that professors there was a good rapport between faculty and students, and we had a paper in American literature in addition to all the whole works of British literature and everything down the ages. But we also had teachers who inspired us. That helped me to continue that interest in American literature, in poetry especially. So when I used to, in Madras Christian College, I would dream of doing a PhD. And I would often talk about sitting in Harvard, just like I was sitting in the college library. But that did not happen because things were so expensive. And though I had brilliant GRE advanced scores and everything, there was very little aid for the humanities, and everything was, even applications were so expensive. So Madras University, out of the blue, when Malcolm Adisesha was the Vice Chancellor, he started a new course called MPhil, which everybody thought was, of course, in philosophy. And but it said it was a pre-doctoral program, a 1 year pre-doctoral. Now that caught my attention, and I decided that I would go and try my luck there. Nobody else was interested in it. I was the only MPhil student full time, and a couple of teacher candidates, 2 or 3 of them from the local colleges, very senior professors. So at that time, I had a Fulbright professor from Pittsburgh, and Dr. Kathleen Healy. So again, I got kind of moved into that area of interest.
Thanks to that one professor whose area of interest it was.
And then she guided my MPhil thesis. I did an MPhil on the American poet Edwin Arlington Robinson. But because I decided I was going to be a teacher, I thought I should change to fiction, broaden my areas of interest and specialization. So my PhD, I specialized in the Southern writer Flannery O'Connor. Then was the short story genre, Flannery O'Connor, and another award-winning writer named J.F. Powers, who was very little known but very much decorated with literary awards. Both were, you can say, grotesque comic writers. Powers more benign than O'Connor, but that set me off on an interest towards the American South. And my PhD took me just outside of my MPhil, which was a 9-month program. My PhD altogether took me just 3.5 years.
3.5 years,
yes.
And 9 months of the MPhil.
Yes.
So that is within the 5 years that we now even currently have for our PhD program.
Yes.
What year was this eventually?
This was 1978 to 81. That was PhD. And a year 77 to 78 was the MPhil. And for the PhD, because I was the only applicant, and there had never been a UGC fellowship tenable at the Madras University department. I was the first ever full-time PhD scholar in the university department, English department, and the first ever to get a PhD in English from that university.
Must have been quite a solitary journey.
Very lonesome, because Madras University was known as the Oxford of India. And deep research, very serious work going, and you didn't have a whole bunch of people around you. But the other thing that Adisesha did was to have an MA program with just a select group of 10 students. And I had a very benevolent guide, Dr. T. Prabhakar, and he allowed me to teach some of the American literature courses, aside from Shakespeare and Spencer and all of that. So his classes, you see, the university was administering the whole infrastructure of colleges in Tamil Nadu. It had then been split up into Bharatiyar and Bharatidasan University, Coimbatore and Trichy.
Right.
But up until then, the whole state came under Madras University, and this one professor had to do it all. There was, of course, a reader and a lecturer and other faculty, but so he let me teach that bunch of 10 students, and we got along very well. We still are in touch.
That's wonderful.
And I was 24 when I joined the university, and I was 27 when I finished, 28, 29 I joined IIT.
And what was that process? So when you graduated and you said, now I have a PhD in hand, how did IIT Madras become the possibility for you to apply?
I never ever thought, I didn't know there was a thing called IIT Madras. Students in MCC used to go for Mardi Gras, that's a cultural festival which was renamed Sarang.
Right.
But I wasn't into that kind of thing, and I did not know that there was any. I thought it's an institute of technology. I didn't think there was anything for me to do here. And in fact, I got a job at the University of MS University Baroda And I used to visit the American Studies Research Center, the ASRC in Hyderabad, the largest research center library for in Asia. And people from all over India used to come there. And I had a chapter of my MPhil thesis published in that international journal, the Journal of Indian American Studies or something it was called. So then I got picked up by some very well-known professors. I was offered a job at MS University by Professor Birjay Patil, who was a friend of my guide, and therefore he encouraged me to join. I had not yet submitted my PhD thesis, but I joined Baroda and I hated it.
How long did you last?
2 months.
You really hated it.
I don't know why, because it's a wonderful university for architecture and art, and
Absolutely.
it's a wonderful place. Yeah. But I couldn't speak the language. I didn't like the food. I didn't like living with the students. I was in the PG hostel. I didn't like all of that. And I was teaching commerce students who were
Not
quite
particularly.
a far cry from the MA students, these hand-picked MA students of Madras University.
So you were in the middle of this sort of indulgent research haven where 10 handpicked students who really wanted to do literature were learning from you.
Yes. And maybe it was a language, maybe it was the weather was foul at that time. It was extremely hot. Everything together, I didn't last for more than 2 months. I came home and cried and told my professor I don't want to go back. So he said, you sit down right where you are and finish writing your thesis. So that was the biggest blessing. I finished writing my thesis. And about the time I finished, by then I was totally depressed and demoralized. I thought I would never get a job in my life. Nobody else had a PhD. What was I, walking around with this degree? But I saw a little ad which said IIT Madras wants lecturers in English able to teach French. And I had done 6 years of French in school and college and with the Alliance Francaise, diploma and diplôme supérieur. So I applied on a blank sheet of paper. There was no application form or anything, and I was interviewed and got the job.
Do you remember the interview?
Yes, of course, because I was the only one with a PhD. And I thought they were going to tell me you're overqualified, go away. But there wasn't anyone who could also teach the French, I think.
I think that particular combination of
Yes.
somebody who was a specialist in literature but could also speak and teach French.
Yes. Also, I had already published in a very well-renowned international journal. Professor Indrasen at the second interview told me that I would be maybe feel unfulfilled teaching here at IIT after doing all this work. So
He recognized that.
he recognized that, but he was very worried about the rate of attrition. But by then, I was convinced, and I was able to convince him also that I had sacrificed a lot. I felt I had sacrificed a lot during my research days, and I was ready to reap the benefits of a Government of India job and all the perks that came with it.
And so the prospect of that kind of both security and settledness were also part of the
Yes.
package that enticed you.
And also the quarters.
The quarters.
You see, Mathangi, 40 years ago, society was very different. Women could not live alone anywhere in the city or anywhere in India. And I, having family in Chennai, it was unheard of that I would go away and live by myself. But because it was campus, and I moved into the D1 quarters, the one-bedroom apartment, had my own little bachelor pad. Normally it would be you stay in the hostel, right? And that I didn't want.
Like MSU.
Like MSU. And I didn't want that. And to have my own little, D1 quarters was just the perfect little place.
Must have been
for
quite
me.
heady to just sort of move
Yes.
into this.
And still, it was not the done thing for women to live alone. And my mother used to visit regularly to convince everybody that this had family approval. And I had 24 pairs of eyes from the opposite block, the
D1 block, yes.
The D1 block, watching over me to see who was coming in and going out. So I had additional security. I counted that as extra
As additional security, and you were looked
I loved
after.
it, yes.
I will tell you this eventually in 2013 when I moved in. Also 2014, end of 2014, I moved into D1 quarters. The situation
Yeah.
has not changed. much.
my.
It was pretty much the same 24 eyes watching me as well and figuring out what is this person doing, moving in. But
Yeah,
I know the feeling of having that kind of independence and
exactly.
what Virginia Woolf might call a room of her own.
A room of our own, a view from your own, vantage point to watch your world, grow your own interests and your own world. Okay. That, okay. So,
And now that sort of you had begun this job and had this sense of, some sort of futurity that now this is a place for you to shape and make your own. What were your first few years in the department like? What was the department like? What were your first few years like?
the department, like as Professor Indresan said, it was mainly for the English group. It was English 1, English 2 courses in communication to the BTech students. For me, it was also additionally PhD level work, because Professor Krishna Rao had initiated a PhD program in English, and we had a bunch of research scholars already there in the department.
By the time you
By
joined?
the time I joined, the first PhD student to get a degree from our department was Madhavi Menon. She worked under Professor Krishna Rao on Indian writing. That was his area, and he had plans to make it a fiction department. But over the years, things kind of grew arms and legs and went in different directions
And broadened in very interesting
very
ways.
interesting new areas, new disciplines also, like anthropology and stuff
Absolutely.
which we didn't have. But I love the BTech students at that level. They were a lot of fun. I also like that, unlike Madras University, though I enjoyed those full years of research. Over here, I met professors from different departments. Eminent Professor Mahabala from computer science, Professor T.K. Bose, the one from chemistry, P.T. Manoharan. They were all, they would stop and say hello because they were seeing some bright young faces. There were very few women faculty. In our department, I think totally there were about 5. In our department, we had a very senior woman faculty named Shakuntala Balraman. I think she was in psychology or social sciences. She was there, and Mrs. Elizabeth Kurian. Her husband was Nainan Kurian from the civil department, civil engineering department. And then there was Lalita from chemistry, Kamala Kirtivasan from computer science, and Kalpagam from mathematics.
So in all,
And that was 5.
that's a handful
5 or
of
6
women
us,
faculty.
yes.
Did you all know each other?
Not really. Not closely at all, because there was nothing to draw us together.
You were all in diverse departments, diverse
Yes.
disciplines.
Cocooned in our own little corners. So that was one thing that was different. Also, because it was an English department, we had journal papers coming to us for editing. And so I learnt about annealing in metallurgy. Professor Ramamurthy would sit with me because I was also teaching French, and he would sit with me and translate articles from English to French or vice versa. And because I did not know the technical terms, I would literally translate. And then he would he would explain to me what that was, and then put in one single word where I would give him 2 or 3 lines of translated work. So Professor Ramamurthy was also one exceptional person. And aerospace also had those journals. And the other departments sent their PhD and MS students to correct their theses. And conference proceedings, 300 pages of articles that you knew nothing about. But you see, that gave you that exposure to different goings on in the world outside of your literature,
Small little
space
silo.
of literature. And
Yeah.
that was what I appreciated when I first came to IIT.
It's much more interdisciplinary, but almost organically, not by design.
Not by design. Because we were not paid for any of that. There was no translation cell and nothing like that. We were just, out of goodwill and friendship, we got to do these
So it
things.
is a certain kind of camaraderie and
Yes.
easy intellectual exchange of a certain.
And this happened with very senior professors and junior faculty like us. I mean, I was French as well as English. And then we had German, the German section. They
Of
were
course.
doing work for translation and other things to
Hmm.
do with DAD and uh, everything German.
So literature, yes, but also language, qua language, right?
Yes, yes.
So maybe this is a good time then to ask you about something you've spoken about with me before, which is the language lab.
Yes, yes. The language lab was the pride of the department. It was a equipment from Norwegian equipment, some Tandberg system or something. It had 30 booths and a console which could control each of those 30 booths together as well as individually. So I got to use it for French teaching. Earlier, the German section had uh, tape recorders.
Mm.
You know, those cassette tape recorders
Mm.
with ribbons.
Mm.
And they didn't have headphones. I don't think those existed in those days. They used those to teach language pronunciation. And also there was Professor Schleusner, and he had a lot of German music, classical music, and you could sit there and listen. And yeah, I think they must have had headphones. Otherwise,
I'm
you
sure
couldn't.
they had
I'm sure
headphones.
they had
Otherwise, it's difficult
headphones
to
because,
listen
you know,
to things.
Madhavi, we lived in such primitive times. We didn't have phones on our desks. We didn't have phones in our homes. There were no computers in existence. So that's why I'm kind of.
So you lived in analog times in many ways.
Yes. We had our question papers. We had an old Ronio machine, which you had to put some ink on it and then roll it, and then the question papers would come rolled out. And you had to sort them, clip them together, make sure they were typed on both sides and not only on one side.
Yeah.
Pick out the smudged ones. That was a technological era.
Technologically specific era of a
Era
certain kind
in
that I
which-
think was also a shared kind of way of
Yes.
figuring out how is it that one relates to work.
Relates to work and appreciates the advancements of technology as one moves
As
along.
and you've seen the whole gamut
Exactly.
as you
That-
go along the
yes,
years.
yes. So when there is so much dissatisfaction about things not moving, I think that looking back, things have moved tremendously.
And perhaps we have forgotten too quickly.
Forgotten too quickly because the next generation did not know about that previous time of deprivation.
Absolutely. Or I sometimes like to think of them also as the time when there was the opportunity to figure out things together
Yes.
in a way rather than have it handed to you in certain ways. So I also have perhaps misplaced nostalgia for a lot of the times that I've straddled in terms of cyclostyle sheets and typing and all of
Yes.
those things.
My PhD was typed on a beat up old typewriter with 4 sheets plus 4 sheets of carbon paper. We didn't have electric or electronic typewriters, so that happened.
Did you learn typewriting
No,
as well?
I gave somebody to do it. I would never have finished otherwise. I would still be doing it. So when the word processors came in, we were so thrilled that you could correct on the spot. You didn't have to waste a whole page to make your corrections.
Going back over it. Yeah, no, I remember going to typing classes when I was in school and running away after 2 months. So I remember
learned to
learning
type.
how to do this.
I did learn to type.
Yeah.
But there were no Xerox, no photocopying machines. So you could not just photocopy Xerox, copy your articles, journals, which is why I spent so much time in Hyderabad reading and making handwritten notes, documenting them correctly so that you don't have to go back and look for those things.
Of course.
Right?
And in many ways, do you find that part of the meticulousness and the rigorousness, which is part of your training, was also something that you followed in your teaching with your doctoral students? What was that relationship like?
My doctoral students, the early years were really wonderful. I had some outstanding students, not just outstanding in their research and commitment to research, but as human beings. My first scholar was Mohana Saxena, and she came to us. She had 2 young children. Some of my scholars were older than me at that time, and she worked very hard. She was the first person to submit from under me. We had a whole bunch of others as well. I told you that Professor Krishna Rao left for Singapore, and he left all his scholars and all of the others, the faculty from our department who were registered for PhD, And I had like running a 3-ring circus. There was considerable hostility and what shall I say? People were unhappy because of an age difference, and that, you know, there was that resentment.
That sense that somebody has come in who's not age appropriate. What was
Well,
the hostility?
when people talk about women being discriminated against, I felt that that was a social thing, but it was more age here because there was a long gap, when a period of maybe 15, 20 years, even 10 to 15 years definitely, when nobody was recruited in the department. So those who were recruited came in with PhDs. Mukesh Williams came from IIT Delhi. Rita Ghatak came from IIT or not IIT, Delhi University. She worked under Professor Indresen's wife. She was psychologist. See, all of them left within a year. And so that they escaped the brunt of that, So,
But you experienced it.
yes, I went through it. I just had to go through it. But the research scholars were exceptional. They were all brilliant students. They came with their own ideas. They knew what they wanted to work on. They excellent. They didn't come with MPhils. Many of them did not come with MPhils. But those who did already had their methodology in place. And it was very exciting to work with them. A range of topics also.
Do you remember some of the early topics that you worked on with them?
Mohana worked on the Southern writer Robert Penn Warden, which was
your area of expertise.
And I had a very lovely girl, Sangeeta Menon. She worked on Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Hers was an exceptionally good thesis, and she did not have a single negative remark in her reports. Very good student. All of my students, PhD scholars, won the Olive Reddick Award for Best Junior Award for Best Paper in American Studies at the Indian Association of American Studies conferences. And so when I went for my promotion interview, Professor N.V.C. Swami, who was director, he asked me, what is this, with all these student papers and there's no name of the guide, there's no affiliation to the guide of the university, to the institute. So I said, if I put my name on that paper, it will not be eligible for a junior award.
Prize.
For the prize.
Sorry, Vansh.
Yes. So year after year, Mohana and then Kokila, and every year there were our students going up to get that Olive Reddick Award.
It speaks to that kind of consistent quality.
The level was definitely high. Language, writing skills, everything was outstanding at that point. And so then I said, they won't get the prize. He said, you're a very generous guide, but this is the institute regulation. You've got to do that. So then after that, all the papers came with my name tagged on.
Yeah.
So in 1995, the expatriate writing, Asian expatriates from America, the Chinese, Japanese, Amy Tan and all those writers were very popular. And then we started to look out and find quite a few, Bharati Mukherjee and Meela Alexander, a few of Indian writers as well. So I persuaded one of our scholars to do that, take up. So she wrote, her thesis was on Indian writing, not only in the US, but in UK and Canada and Australia as well.
So the beginning of the category of the sort of global Indian American writer, diaspora writing, but very specifically on Indian diaspora across the world.
So that was Lata Rangachari, and we did a workshop. We did a seminar or workshop, and that went off so well. We spent a minimum, our expenses were minimal, and we had such a really extraordinary program. So after that, I began to get more committed to expatriate and immigrant writing.
And so your research also moves from American literature as a very specific classic category to the expansion of the category itself as to who or what counts as Americans.
Not only as Americans, I was more worried about Indians now, the Indian diaspora. So just by chance, while I was looking at, I was publishing, I was sending, not publishing, but reading these conference papers at the International Society for Humor Studies. And I did two papers, two or three papers there. One was Meera Sayal, Goodness Gracious Me, and
Yes.
the Kumars at number 42. That was a very popular TV serial.
Of course.
So I did a paper on humor, television humor, immigrant television humor. And then I did another paper on South Asian marriage, diaspora and marriage, film, which was, we had Gurinder Chadar, Meera Nair, and what's the third one? Who
Not
did
Anita
Fire?
Desai.
No, not Fire was
Deepa Mehta.
Deepa Mehta. Yes. So those three those three filmmakers, and then I found that all three of them were Punjabi.
Yes, of course.
All three of them were Punjabi. And I came across an article in, just by chance, another serendipitous discovery in Prema Rajagopalan's room on the Punjabi diaspora in the UK and Canada, UK, US, Canada, and their success story. But it was an economics journal.
Of course, because it was Prema's
Yes.
room that you're reading this
And
in,
then
yes.
I decided that I'm not going, based on that, I was going to look at the Punjabi diaspora in literature and film. And that's how I got into that area. But instead of taking it up as an ICNSR project with a research scholar, with a research assistant, I got a research scholar in like earlier time. I pushed that topic onto her. And then the only thing is it took a very long time. What have been 2 years or maximum 3 years? 2 years or so with an RA working. It took about 6 or 7 years of PhD. The difference is by now the PhD students became very slow in the sense they were clinging to their fellowships. They wanted to finish those 5 years, extract the 5 years of fellowship, by which time they had lost their
sort of steam in the project.
Lost their steam, couldn't get things together, and get depression and all these other things, And
what years were these, Evangeline? Because you're also marking a kind of shift that has now become our present reality in a way. Right?
Around 2000, see, in the 90s up to 2000, this I'm talking of 2007 on to 10, 15, 10, 7 to say 14, 15.
So about, yeah.
And then once you came into 2020, everything was,
of course, a wholly different world altogether.
Yes.
So now we don't even know.
A difficult world as well.
Yeah, it is.
But at that time, people took long drawn out, and they came without a topic. You had to give them the topic, tell them the names of the writers, they give them the names of the books, and there was I kind of kept discovering these things, and that's how I wanted to do an ICNSR project on Punjabi literature.
In that vein, I also wanted you to speak a little bit about your teaching as well, the courses that you introduced, and what were the diverse areas that you taught in and your favorite areas.
Not my favorite area, but the students' favorite area was French. They loved that French class. There were mountains of students standing. You had to get consent of teacher, and you had to line up to get the signature from the teacher. There was always such a scramble. And so they loved the French. I liked teaching it. It was fun. But English also was okay. I taught, by that time the English communication courses were outsourced. And we were teaching electives in our own areas of interest. My first elective that I taught was something called Humanities in a Technological Age. I visited Stanford, and there I found some courses which were directed to civilizations and the humanities. So I wrapped it around to suit our
context of
technology and our institute requirements. That courses, even electives, have to relate to technology.
Right.
So based on an essay called Literature in a Technological Age by Cleanth Brooks, I titled my course Humanities in a Technological Age. I used that essay as well. But we tied up all the disciplines from around the institute: civil engineering and art and engineering, sculpture and structure, history and technology. How does technology drive history and ethics, philosophy and engineering, computers and ethics. We had creativity, the differences or the similarities between creativity in the arts and in the sciences and engineering, and they're almost parallel. We did Edgar Allan Poe's essay, The Philosophy of Composition, where he tells you how he composed the Raven backwards. To demystify this whole process of the romantics, that you were inspired by the muse and you had so he says he started from the last line and went to the forward midway, and not the last midway. He had the end and the beginning in mind, but he started midway and worked towards both ends.
Almost like an algorithm or a mathematical equation.
And I had a student who sat in the back of the class and added 2 or 3 more stanzas to that poem using the same rhyme scheme and everything else. So the engineering students really loved that course. It brought in a lot of people together. I brought in literature through the side door. They were reading Cummings and Sandberg, and they were reading Indian poets, and all kinds of stuff.
Fabulous. I would love to take that class. Too.
So that was one interesting class. And short story classics was another very popular course. Somebody said that and engineering design were the only 2 courses he felt he really enjoyed at IIT. Because short story classics also, we studied story and structure, the details, the technical details of structure. And then we had students write their own stories for the end semester assignment.
Using these structure principles.
Yes.
Oh, lovely. So, I had 2 more sort of work and research things I wanted to ask you about eventually. One is your Fulbright experiences. So that was one. And the second, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you saw the evolution is the wrong word, how the department developed over the 36 years that you've been here. It's just some sort of thoughts on that. So, but first your 2 Fulbright experiences.
My Fulbright experience, again, I always wanted to study in an American university.
When you said Harvard in the beginning.
Yes, Harvard in the beginning, and I had to just curl my tail and settle for something else. And when I got to the Madras University, I discovered, at least I found out, that the Fulbright is a free ticket to an American university. But pre-doctoral fellowships were not available to full-time PhD scholars. You had to have a job to come back to in India and then go on a Fulbright, collect your research material, study at a university and come back. And so only full-time teachers, faculty from universities, colleges, only they were eligible. And they didn't have PhDs. They didn't have any, what would they do pre-doctoral when they haven't even registered for a PhD? So, of course, some were there around the country who went on pre-doctoral fellowships. So that was a bit of a disappointment, but my professors were, each year, Fulbright professors were coming to Madras University. I had a wonderful teacher, Dr. C.T. Indra, a brilliant teacher really, and she went on a postdoc Fulbright. She was very young at that time. She was probably like me and my MA students, less than about a maximum 5-year age difference. So she went on the Fulbright. So when I got the job at IIT, I thought, now I have that requirement fulfilled. I have a permanent job in India to come back to. So I applied for a Fulbright postdoctoral. This is senior fellowship for people who are senior professors.
Right.
And Krishna Rao was not very keen on forwarding that application. But there was a little loophole. They said, you can go and meet the director. So I went and met Professor Indrasen, and he said, you haven't even been confirmed in the job.
It hadn't even been a year.
No, it was just soon after my PhD. I joined the institute, maybe 6 months or 8 months. And I told him, no, but I will be confirmed by the time, if I fill in this application and I get selected, the fellowship will be only for the following year.
After,
Yes, the award is for the following year, by which time I'll be confirmed. And he said, you're very presumptuous, but he forwarded my form and I did get selected and I did go the following year. So I went to the American South. I went to the University of Georgia and Louisiana State University, not to Harvard. I could have filled up Harvard, Columbia, Yale.
Of course.
But at my interview, they said that one of the reasons I did that clicked for me is because I did not feel Harvard.
Also because your interest in the American South then also are
Yes.
of one with your choice of university to go to.
No, because also people put Harvard, Yale, and Columbia just to look nice on the resumes. But I at least exhibited that I was serious about my research.
Absolutely.
And
That
later
it was
on,
for the research and not merely to have a trip to the US.
Yes. That was a life-changing experience to live in the American South after having studied it for 5
So
years,
long.
absorbed in it.
Yeah.
And first trip abroad, first trip to America. So I traveled the length and breadth of that country, and on my way back all of Europe, Western Europe, whatever was open at that time.
Yeah.
And then I brought all that back to my PhD
Which year was this
students.
eventually?
1984-85. And then I think I was a changed person. I could live alone in the US because I learned to live alone here. Here was not living alone. You were surrounded by people, but I did not live on campus. I lived alone outside of campus. And that made a huge difference. My second Fulbright was on that. I applied for a Fulbright visiting lecturer position. You see, the first Fulbright was an Fulbright was an international competition. Very strong competitive thing, like 5 or 6 people from all over the world. But the second Fulbright was a Fulbright Nehru. By that time, we had a binational agreement. We had Fulbright Tata, Fulbright Nehru.
Right.
So management people went on Tata fellowships. We went on Fulbright Nehru fellowships. And the VLF, I chose to go to Hawaii. And that's where I discovered also my interest in diaspora expanded from Indians, going to better their lives to indentured labor Indians scattered all over. Truly, in a sense, truly diasporic. Indians indentured labor in Fiji and Mauritius, South Africa, Trinidad, Tobago, all over the West Indies. And so that kind of coincidentally, a similar thing happened where the Americans brought in into the Hawaiian Islands people from China, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines. And all of this centered around sugarcane. The British for their sugarcane plantations, and the Americans also to work their sugar plantations in Hawaii. So that was a whole new area of research that opened up to me and which I kept working on after I came back. That was in 2011.
And what a great arc.
Yes, from 2011 on, that I've been several times back to Hawaii and reading and studying, meeting friends there. And so that, life takes you along and your mind grows.
Provided you're willing to go with it.
No, you can't stick with one thing and use your same notes and teach them for the rest of your years.
You're right, but I have to add a note here, Evangeline, that this is also about you, because not everybody is willing to go in the direction that life opens up in.
I kind of tend to follow my nose.
Your nose has a very good sense of smell then your olfactory senses are to be congratulated.
About the department's development, I must say that, when we came in, we were treated like schoolgirls. You didn't have a voice really to talk about even your own grading, your cutoff points, your grades, your electives when they were brought up in the Senate. But now I just love that the young people who join come with their full vigor, their interests, their opinions, and everything is, nobody can really violate those freedoms. Doesn't happen anymore. So to see people like you, and before that there was Swarna, Jyotirmaya, Srilata, that bunch of younger people, and they all were on the other side. We were on this side, our side, and that side was called the North Wing by the industrial management people because they then migrated to the dorms. But then that became the youth wing. We were the oldies, most unwelcome over there.
I doubt anybody is going to call you an oldie.
Which is why I think I was all the time poking my head into your office room.
Of
You were
course.
the young blood in the department and I was keeping myself refreshed by.
I was grateful for that. Whether it was sort of having this mutual sartorial admiration or just saying hello, it was always so wonderful to
Not only with you, but your research scholars.
Yes, that
they
is
must
true.
have thought this professor is more interested in clothes than in books.
And they were very happy for it because they had enough of being asked about their research interests. They were very happy to have a life where we can sort of talk about everything in many ways.
Yes.
So,
lot of facilities in the department, lot of facilities in the institute. Exams used to be centralized. Now exams are personalized.
Absolutely.
Not even department-wise, they're personalized. A lot of construction, a lot of work outside. The ICSNR building, that was the best building the institute boasted of. When Professor Indrasen left, the SAT building was something he left behind as a legacy for convocations and as a huge auditorium. Earlier, the OIT was the only available space.
The giant space over here.
For convocations, if it rained, you got drenched there. And if it was sunny, you got roasted, baked. While you wore all those convocation
regalia.
Paraphernalia, I would
Baked
say.
in regalia.
Yes. So all these new constructions, not only, but the whole institute, the department has changed because disciplines, the memory studies now, and your anthropology, so many areas have opened up.
Expanded our sort of understanding of what
Yes.
humanities and social sciences does.
Yes. But I hear that it's become very polarized. Everybody is in their own little niche, and there isn't that much of interaction between people.
Or
So
that sense
I
of
think is,
organic connection research-wise also.
that is a little not very welcome, very disappointing, because after all, with all your studies and everything, we are people first.
Absolutely. I mean, if anything, the humanities should be able to teach us that at the
Yes.
least.
And now that they're on separate floors and everything.
We've expanded, which is a great thing, but it means that you have to work harder to keep that connection.
Yes.
Maybe two more things, Evangeline, before we wrap up. One is, I know we have spoken a lot about the Women's Forum, which is now a thriving sort of institution on campus.
Yes,
but could you speak a little
almost
bit about
forgot about that, because I was, one of those quiescent women who just let things, I let society change, and I didn't kill myself trying to change things. I think I was a little not subservient to those values, but I was independent in my head and in my heart and my behavior and everything. But I didn't go against the system as such. In IIT, I felt privileged to have all these other facilities. One thing we truly lacked, and that is the Women's Forum was Professor Anant, I think, started up this thing, the Women's Forum in 2002. Professor Lalita from chemistry, she was the first president. At the inauguration, we were, not the inauguration or whatever that was called, it was a little like a seminar with all the women and everything. So Professor Anant came to inaugurate that, and I was asked to make a presentation, at which I brought to the notice of the director that there were no women's toilets available anywhere in the institute except in this administrative building.
That's it.
That's it.
On the 800-acre campus.
Yes.
Besides the residents, of course.
The residents, of course, no, I was resident, so I didn't feel it. I would run home for lunch, I was up and down. But for mathematics students, a whole bunch of women students in maths and all the others, faculty, staff.
The only facilities that they could use?
You had to come from whichever end of campus you were and go to the administrative building. Ad block, first floor or second floor or something.
What year was this eventually? Would you remember?
I'm starting from 1982 right up to 2002, my dear. 1982 when I came in, and the institute was there long before I joined, up to 2002. And in 2002, I spoke up because I was GATE or JE chief examiner or something. And we had to do manual evaluation sitting in the
JE room,
the JE room, and manually evaluate all those English papers, because English was a common subject for all the, not like physics, chemistry, mathematics. English was a common paper for all the candidates, some lakh or 2 lakh candidates. So we had people from other colleges and outsiders and everybody coming, English faculty, to check those papers and evaluate. there was no toilet there. You had to stay from like say 8 a.m. till 4 or 5. It was terrible.
So at the first meeting of the Women's Forum, one of the things you present to the director is, why are there no...
Not why, the fact that there are no such facilities available for women. And Professor Anand was quite shocked. He was quite taken aback. He said, I never even thought about it. Nobody thinks about it. And in a very roundabout way, I brought this about in my presentation with slides about all other things. And this was kind of very tactfully slipped in. Because, it was considered inelegant or something to talk about such things. Very strange. But then that meant he insisted, he made sure that everywhere there was a men's toilet, there had to be a women's facility as well. So in HSB, Meenakshi, who was in DOMS, technician from DOMS, she was then still in our department. She and I sat together and we designed those 3 toilets that are on the 3 floors of our HSB building. Those are big mirrors and you can change there. You can even shower there if you want to go out for a wedding or something. You can. So
and that one little toilet cubicle with the full length mirror is the coveted one even now.
Yeah. So that was one big thing that happened.
So thanks to you, these are things that we haven't had to think about since joining.
Oh, but I think that lot of stuff gets overlooked simply because nobody mentions it or speaks about it. We work around our problems. That's the trouble with us women. Absolutely. We don't aggressively, or we are not proactive towards solving these problems directly,
or even presenting them.
We work around them. And I will on my scooter take home somebody who needs to use a toilet or get changed to go out. That way we work around.
It's true. You don't think about this as something that the workplace needs to provide to women as much as...
I'm sure that in today's day and age, that would have been unheard of. That would be totally unheard of.
You'd be surprised, Evangeline. There are still many places. And, complete side note, but my very dear friend and colleague, Parumita Vora, who's a filmmaker in Bombay, quite not so long ago, you met Parumita, had a movie called Q2P, which is how does a city provide facilities for men but not for women in terms of just toilets, and how that is a public responsibility. So you were far ahead.
But in an institution like this, as large and as forward thinking as IIT, world over, people are all praise for IITs.
No, this is why I think that it was a great service that you did to the rest of us who came later on, to not have to talk about it or bring it up.
It wasn't even meant as a service or any kind of aggressive action
of
or anything. It was just something that I thought, now that there's a women's forum, let's mention
talk about it.
Say something about it. But our credit goes to Professor Anand, because, he was the one who took it up.
Immediately. No, responsiveness is also to be congratulated in many ways. Maybe towards the end, Evangeline, if you could speak a little bit about, some of your favorite people on campus, or your relationships with them, or anecdotes about interesting things that happened over your time here, and your lovely home, of course.
My lovely home, I changed 5 times, I think. I went from D1 quarters to D31, D-type, 31, which is a new building. The D1 was also a new building. Then from there, I went to C2, which was again a new building. And from C2, I went to Kurunji, again a new building. Finally, my 5th move was to B87, my really favorite place.
It's a lovely house. I still remember your beautiful garden.
House and garden, and the upstairs we were living in a tree house with all those rain tree and those flowers and mangoes and monkeys, and from the upstairs you could watch the monkeys. They would watch us through the monkey grill like we were in a zoo, and they were jumping about on the mango trees. Campus was wonderful. My favorite people, I can't say, but I remember in our department we had a Professor C. Ramchandran. He was a favorite among students. He taught a course called MGCC, Modern Governments and something Constitutions.
With a course title like that, he was a favorite professor.
He was favorite. He taught 100 students at a time. We cribbed for 40 students, but he taught 100 students at a time. And then He passed away a few years ago. He would come in early because students will wait from 4 or 5 a.m. for the door to be opened at 7:30 or 8 and to collect signatures. So he would come in early and sign off, and he would sit there till the 100th student took the signature. He was a very dedicated,
beloved professor.
Very
clearly.
beloved professor. Professor Nagarajan, our director, he was also very good to me in some ways. I loved that he had a dog, a very local Indian dog that moved from seat-type quarters to the director's quarters. His red collar, very proud, and the whole demeanor changed for that little fellow. And he and his wife used to walk their dog.
Yeah.
One time I had to go to Australia for presenting a paper, and nothing. We presented papers. To get institute funding once in 4 years, we had to have one paper every year. And because the journals didn't have the money, they would hold the spring session, spring, autumn, winter, everything together in one. And it would take a whole year, maybe 2 years. So your papers all got bunched up together. They had to be available in print, not just accepted. So that year I had 8 papers in the 4 years. And I had every eligibility to get full funding, but my papers were not moving. My application was not moving. And when I met Dr. Natarajan, Professor Natarajan said, there's a procedure, you have to do all these things, and he just shooed me away. And I said, no, I've followed all that procedure, that's why I'm coming to you. And he picked up the phone and asked. K. Padmanabhan was the Dean Research. He said, everything's fine, I've sent it. Then he called the admin and he followed it up. And by which time I had almost reached the dates of the conference. You need your 1 week at least to get a visa. And I had planned to use my summer vacation and then finish up with the conference and come back to my classes. But none of that happened. And he said, I hope this doesn't happen to anybody else. I've checked it out and I'm very sorry. He said, I hope you get a visa and you can go, and I'll give you 2 weeks into the semester, leave into the semester so that you can
be able to spend the time that
visit
you planned.
the university. So I visited the Sydney conference was in Sydney. From Sydney, I went to Canberra to Australian National University as well. And I took those 2 weeks off. So, he actually called home to apologize. When they said director, I picked up the phone and the office said, director's office, director wants to speak to you. I thought, what have I done now?
Because that is always the first thought.
Like the school principal wants to meet you. But I thought, a very humble and very sincere approach to a faculty member's problem. That conference would have just slipped by. And
how lovely. And how heartening in many ways to know of.
Very human touch.
Extremely. And sort of really acknowledging and valuing a colleague's contributions in many ways. To say that this is work that needs to be out there.
That you're not just a cog in the machinery and who cares, you read or publish or don't do anything, who bothers.
Absolutely.
Because, somehow I think administrative staff, I don't blame them, but probably they think these are just foreign trips. They aren't. They are visits to enhance your academic qualifications, to make your contacts, to network.
Absolutely. And it's very difficult to sort of explain that or produce a compelling narrative as to what a difference it makes to our research and our teaching to have these conversations. There is a disproportionate effect that it has in our contributions to a sort of our daily work.
They would probably say, you can go next year, you can go to the US, why do you want to go to Australia? But Australia was where some things were happening.
It's true. I think those
Lovely
are pretty much
to you, Madhavi.
huge, Evangeline. I still want to ask you one last set of questions though, which is, 36 years of experience and all of these varied sort of adventures that you've had. What advice would you have for students and for colleagues in the humanities and social sciences?
So, I really don't think anybody follows advice, Mathangi, these days. But let me tell you some things that helped me. One, there used to be a lady in the library, a very senior person. She was the acquisitions librarian, Mrs. Durai Raj. And she was a very vibrant, lively person, very cheerful. I much admired her personality. When she retired, she said something that really stuck with me. She said, not her exact words, but she said that she was sorry that she had wasted so much time involved and affected by the departmental politics and all that people said and did to upset her. And she would have been much happier if she had used that time to just to enjoy her life in IIT. That stayed with me really, and I made sure that I kept reminding myself that it was not necessary to be totally given up to all that's going on around me that makes me unhappy. The second thing was a very dear pastor of mine. His name was Dr. Samuel Kamalesan. Again, a very warm and magnetic personality, a very brilliant man. This I remember verbatim because I cut it out from the church bulletin and I had kept it to remind myself of what the advice that he had given. What he said was that you don't give in to the stresses of life, because you can be overwhelmed by all that happens to you in life. Instead, you should not waste that time every day that is precious in God's sight, because, and these are the exact words, because you realize the days were good when the days are gone. So as a young person, I always felt overwhelmed by each and every little challenge that came my way. But this little bit of advice carried me through, and I think it's very good advice. If anyone finds it useful, that's a happy thing.
What occupies your time these days? What are you thinking about? What are you writing about?
What am I doing with myself after retirement? Well, COVID put a stop to all the travel plans, all the excitement that I had lined up for myself. So I didn't really start traveling till 2023. But COVID also taught me to be at peace with myself, stay at home, do the things that I love to do, all the non-academic interests, to develop those. So my reading, you said, what am I reading? For the first time in many, many years now, I've started reading not with academic goals in mind, because academics has a way of restricting your creativity in a way. You have to be, it's very prescriptive and objective, whereas you lose out on your personal style, your personal opinions, things like that. So I think that what I'm reading now is mostly non-academic reading, things that I love, I enjoy, and maybe writing too, trying my hand at some non-academic writing.
No, and I know that you come to a lot of the events at IIT. I know writing, when I write to you and say this is happening, I always see you at the event and I'm always so delighted to be able to have conversations.
I love to come to campus because it's nostalgic and it's so green. It's so green. Outside you miss that greenery. True. So that's it.
I for one hope that you keep continuing coming to the department and that you keep having these conversations with us, because the same sort of intellectual engagement from you is something that I'm so grateful for as well, both intellectual and personal. So thank you again for being willing to do this.
Yeah, thank you for doing this, taking the patience and the time. This is a long, wait for getting this thing done.
And my privilege, entirely my privilege and joy. So, and I mean every word of that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Lovely.